Clint Eastwood made his first public appearance in 5 months.
Well, Gene, I've worked with Gene on the same thing, but he's so ready to go.
At 94, Clint Eastwood just dropped a jaw-dropping bombshell about Gene Hackman that no one saw coming. Their decades-long history had its fair share of highs and some serious lows, but it turns out a moment from 1992 might have been the turning point.
He's the kind of guy that loves to be left alone.
And now, after all these years, Eastwood is finally spilling the truth about what really went down back then and how it all led to Hackman's death.
Gene I'd known for many years, but we'd never worked together. And he was in a mood at that time. He says, I don't want to do any more violent pictures. I'm tired of it. I've been involved with a lot of them. He says, I'm really tired of it.
And if you don't know, let me tell you, Clint Eastwood and Gene Hackman weren't just two Hollywood actors who happened to cross paths. They were cut from the same rough, unpolished cloth. They both entered the industry the hard way, with no safety nets, no famous last names, and certainly no shortcuts. Hollywood didn't roll out a red carpet for them. They had to kick the door down themselves. Their first real encounter came in 1971 on the set of The Beguiled, a Southern Gothic psychological thriller. Eastwood played a wounded Union soldier taken in by a group of Southern women at a boarding school, while Hackman had a much smaller role. But their real story wasn't happening on screen. It was brewing behind the scenes.
What I feel like it was to do is do it great immediately and move on. And you know, he's somebody who you can do that.
Both men carried the weight of their pasts into Hollywood. Eastwood grew up in a working-class family, moving from place to place as his father struggled to find steady work. He spent years taking on odd jobs, working as a logger, a gas station attendant, and even a swimming instructor before landing his first real break. Hackman's story wasn't much different. Raised in a dysfunctional home, he had to escape through sheer determination. Before he even thought about acting, he joined the Marines at just SEA, lying about his age to get in. For both men, the military wasn't just a job. It shaped how they saw the world. Discipline, grit, and resilience weren't just qualities they admired. They were survival tools.
When people are indecisive, and I've watched him with other directors, and he'll get really annoyed.
Maybe that's why they understood each other so well. Hollywood back then was still clinging to its old ways. Polished leading men, smooth-talking charm, and actors who played it safe. But Eastwood and Hackman weren't made for the red carpet life. They didn't care about PR campaigns, schmoozing with producers, or playing the Hollywood game. They had a different energy, something raw and unfiltered. They weren't just actors, they were builders, carving out their own space in an industry that wasn't built for guys like them. Eastwood, fresh off his rawhide fame and already stepping into the spaghetti western scene, had developed a reputation for his silent, brooding performances. He wasn't the guy delivering long, poetic monologues. He was the one staring you down, making every moment count without wasting a single word. Hackman, on the other hand, was an entirely different beast. He thrived on detail, on complexity, on digging into the psychology of a character until it felt like second nature. He was intense, expressive, and completely unpredictable. Qualities that made him both brilliant and difficult to work with.
If you get going and say, no, I see it a little bit different, he'll go for that, but he doesn't like to have you experimenting on his time.
On the surface, they looked like they could have been best friends. Two men who had fought their way to the top, rejecting the glitz and glamour in favor of raw, real performances. But even in those early years, something was off. Their chemistry wasn't built on effortless camaraderie, it was built on friction. Hackman's methodical, analytical approach clashed with Eastwood's instinctive, no-nonsense style. Where Eastwood believed in doing as few takes as possible, Hackman would push for more, dissecting every line and every movement. Yet, despite their differences, there was an unspoken understanding between them. They weren't just actors playing roles. They were redefining what masculinity looked like on screen. Hollywood had spent decades presenting men as polished, clean-cut heroes, gentlemen who always said the right thing and played by the rules. Eastwood and Hackman shatter that illusion. Their characters were rugged, unpredictable, morally flawed. They didn't fit into the mold of traditional leading men, and that's exactly why audiences connected with them.
Richard Harris, Morgan Freeman, Francis Fisher, and especially to Clint, who kind of made it all possible for me and for everyone else in the film.
By the time The Beguiled wrapped, there was no doubt that these two were on different trajectories. Eastwood was already moving towards something bigger, something beyond just acting. He wasn't satisfied being just another Hollywood star. He wanted control. He wanted to shape the stories himself, to direct, to produce. Hackman, meanwhile, was honing his craft, diving into more emotionally complex roles, proving again and again that he could disappear into any character. From a distance, they looked like brothers in arms, two men cut from the same cloth, forging their own paths in an industry that didn't make space for men like them. But cracks were already forming. Beneath the mutual respect was a quiet but growing divide, one that would only become more obvious as the years went on.
Gene Hackman and Unforgiven.
Throughout the 1970s and 80s, Clint Eastwood and Gene Hackman ruled Hollywood, their careers moving in parallel but never quite intersecting. They weren't rivals, at least not in the way Hollywood usually defined the term. They weren't fighting for the same roles, stealing projects from one another, or taking public jabs at each other. But there was an unspoken challenge between them, a quiet but undeniable test of endurance. Who would last the longest? Who would leave the bigger mark on cinema? Who would shape the industry rather than just exist within it? By the time the 70s began, Eastwood had already established himself as an icon. He was the king of the spaghetti westerns, fresh off The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, 1966, and had officially taken Hollywood by storm with Dirty Harry, 1971. That film alone changed his entire trajectory. He wasn't just a Western star anymore, he was the embodiment of the new American anti-hero. Ruthless, unflinching, a man of few words but deadly efficiency. Dirty Harry made sure Eastwood's name would never be forgotten. The film grossed $36 million against a $4 million budget, proving that audiences didn't just want clean-cut heroes anymore. They wanted men like Eastwood, flawed, complex, and dangerous. But while Eastwood was redefining the action hero, Hackman was doing something entirely different. In 1971, the same year Dirty Harry was released, Hackman delivered one of the most defining performances of his career in The French Connection. As Popeye Doyle, a relentless, morally ambiguous detective, Hackman wasn't just playing a cop, he was showing what obsession looked like, what it cost. The film was a massive success, winning 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Actor for Hackman. Overnight, he became Hollywood's go-to for crime dramas and thrillers. He wasn't playing cowboys or action stars, he was stepping into roles that required raw intensity, emotional depth, and a willingness to be ugly on screen. Through the 70s and 80s, their paths continued side by side, but never quite overlapping. Eastwood built his empire as both an actor and a director, taking complete creative control over his projects. He starred in and directed The Outlaw Josie Wales, 1976, a film that proved he wasn't just a Western actor, he was a filmmaker with a distinct vision. He wasn't just taking roles, he was crafting them from the ground up. Then came Escape from Alcatraz, 1979, Sudden Impact, 1983, and Pale Rider, 1985. One hit after another. But more than that, Eastwood was evolving. He was no longer just a performer, he was shaping the way Hollywood made films. Hackman, meanwhile, was refining his craft, proving he could do what few actors could, completely disappear into any role. The Conversation, 1974, saw him deliver a chillingly reserved performance as a paranoid surveillance expert. In Mississippi Burning, 1988, he played an FBI agent investigating civil rights murders, a performance that earned him an Academy Award nomination. He didn't need action-packed sequences or guns blazing. He commanded attention through sheer presence. He could be loud, aggressive, terrifying, or quiet and introspective. He was a chameleon, constantly shifting, never sticking to one genre or one type of character. Despite working in different spaces, their bond remained intact. They occasionally crossed paths, and there were even moments where they considered the same roles. Apocalypse Now, 1979, was one of them. Hackman was considered for a major role, while Eastwood was offered the part of Willard but turned it down. They weren't competing in the traditional sense, but they were both aware of what the other was doing. Both were carving out their own legends, but eventually, the industry would put them face to face in a way that neither of them could have expected. And that's when everything changed.
Gene I'd known for many years, but we'd never worked together. And he was in a mood at that time. He says, I don't want to do any more violent pictures. I'm tired of it. I've been involved with a lot of them. He says, I'm really tired of it.
By the time Unforgiven, 1992, came around, both men had reached the absolute peak of their careers. Eastwood was no longer just an action star. He was an acclaimed filmmaker with over 10 directing credits to his name. Hackman, too, was at his height, winning another Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for his role in Mississippi Burning. Their names carried weight. They were no longer just actors, they were Hollywood institutions. And now, for the first time in decades, they would collide on screen in a way that no one expected. Eastwood had only one man in mind for the role of Sheriff Little Bill Daggett, Gene Hackman. There was no second choice, no backup plan. Hackman was the actor Eastwood believed could bring the necessary depth and brutality to the character. But there was a problem. Hackman didn't want the role.
I said, I know exactly where you're coming from, but read it again because I think we can make a great statement against violence.
He had already started pulling away from ultraviolent films and initially turned it down, worried that Unforgiven would be just another blood-soaked Western. But Eastwood pushed back, telling him, this isn't about violence, it's about reckoning with it. Hackman signed on, but from the very start, something was off. The tension that made them great actors also made them terrible collaborators. On set, Hackman wanted depth. He wanted to explore the character, improvise, and push scenes further.
And killing him if we do this right. Of course, it's all in the execution. You got to execute it right, or else it's nothing means anything then.
Eastwood hated that. He ran his sets like a military operation, quick, efficient, no unnecessary takes. He wanted to get in, get the shot, and move on. Hackman wanted time, nuance, exploration. The friction was immediate. During filming, Hackman repeatedly challenged Eastwood's direction, questioning how certain scenes should be played. He pushed back against the idea of making Little Bill a straightforward villain, arguing that his character should be more complex. Eastwood wasn't interested in debating. He was the director, and his word was final. The two clashed, sometimes publicly, with Hackman growing frustrated over Eastwood's rigid approach, and Eastwood growing equally frustrated with Hackman's insistence on dissecting every moment.
So he did. He reread it and he came back and said, yeah, okay, I'll do this.
The tension didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. During press interviews, both men dodged questions about each other, refusing to acknowledge any issues, but never offering any real praise either. If anything, they downplayed their relationship, acting as if they were just two professionals who happened to share a screen. But it wasn't that simple. Something had changed. Something had shifted. They had come into Unforgiven as old colleagues with mutual respect. But by the time the film wrapped, that bond had fractured. Whenever Eastwood was asked about Hackman in interviews, his response was always the same: short, dismissive, and carefully avoiding specifics. In a 2003 interview, when a journalist asked if he and Hackman had kept in touch, Eastwood simply said, "I haven't talked to him in years. Don't really know what he's up to." That was it. No praise, no nostalgia, just a cold, clipped answer. Hackman's silence was even more unsettling. He had never been the type to shy away from discussing his past films or co-stars. But when Eastwood's name came up, he shut it down immediately. In a 1997 interview, when a reporter pressed him about whether he'd ever work with Eastwood again, Hackman smiled, exhaled sharply, and said, "Next question." That was all it took to fuel speculation. He wasn't just avoiding the subject. He seemed like a man who couldn't talk about it. Hollywood conflicts happen all the time. Directors clash with actors. Co-stars have personal feuds. It's not unusual. But they don't just erase each other from existence. Even actors who famously hated each other, like Marlon Brando and Frank Sinatra, still acknowledged each other in interviews. But with Eastwood and Hackman, it was different. It wasn't just tension, it was silence. Something was being hidden. Then, in 2020, an exchange between Eastwood and a journalist sent shockwaves through Hollywood. He was asked about Hackman's unexpected disappearance from the public eye, and for a split second, he looked visibly uncomfortable. Then, in a chillingly vague response, he muttered just 3 words. "I told him," and then he walked away. No explanation, no elaboration, just those 3 words, leaving behind a trail of questions no one could answer. What had he told him? Was it a warning, a threat, a prophecy? People immediately began digging. In a 1992 interview, shortly after Unforgiven premiered, Eastwood had made an eerie comment about Hackman. "He's too reckless. He doesn't understand the rules of Hollywood. His non-flexible approach will kill him one day." At the time, it seemed like a simple comment about Hackman's career choices, but now, in hindsight, it sounded like something much darker. Because Hackman wasn't just another actor. He was someone who had always pushed back against the Hollywood system. He wasn't afraid to speak his mind, to call out power structures, to challenge directors, studios, and executives. He had a reputation for questioning authority, for being difficult, for demanding artistic integrity over industry politics. And then, suddenly, he was gone. In 2004, Hackman vanished from Hollywood entirely, announcing his retirement without a farewell tour, no dramatic send-off, no appearances at award shows to receive Lifetime Achievement Awards. He just disappeared. For a man of his status, that wasn't normal. Actors don't just quit like that, especially not while they're still at the top. And then came the real bombshell. Hackman was found dead without any external symptoms. No heart attack, no stroke, no known illness, no warning signs, just gone. And that's when the FBI got involved. Reports surfaced that federal agents had retrieved private documents from Hackman's house, but the contents were never made public. The official statement was vague, something about personal records and no suspicious activity, but people weren't buying it. Why was the FBI involved in the death of a retired actor? Why were they collecting files from his home? Some theorists believe Hackman had been gathering evidence on the darker side of Hollywood. The under-the-table deals, the cover-ups, the way careers were made and destroyed behind closed doors. He had always been outspoken about the industry's power structures, the way certain people controlled everything, the way actors and filmmakers were often forced into silence. Had he discovered something too big? The truth is still unfolding, and you won't want to miss what comes next. So hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed to stay ahead of the story.